This is Dale Maharaj. We're winding down these shows that kind of tell the backstory to our early years of our work that led to our first book, Journey to Nowhere, which, of course, ultimately became the 30-year project that became our book, Someplace Like America. So after we left Texas, we headed west, and we met this couple hitchhiking, Al and Betty. I know we were driving along, we saw them hitchhiking, and we said, oh my gosh, they don't belong. We picked them up. They owned a hotel in Kansas. They'd lost it, foreclosure. Meantime, Michael and I were stressed, and we began arguing at one point. And I remember Al cut in and said, why he wisely counseled us that we shouldn't argue. There's bigger forces at work than the stuff we were arguing about. And he said they learned that a long time ago. That's how they got along, and that's how they dealt with the stuff on the road. And it was kind of like the man with no legs telling you not to complain about your shoes, being too small. Al wasn't being scolding. He was just being smart. So we ended up near Tucson. We camped out in the desert. We slept under the stars. And we spent the day driving the couple around to look for work. They wanted to land a hotel management job. Lacking that, they were looking for a place to stay in exchange for doing work like painting and so forth. Then they had luck at this hotel. They were told to come back later. The couple was stoked. So we took them around to other hotels. Then late that day, we went back to that place that offered hope. The man who told them that they could stay had bad news. His wife wouldn't allow it. Al bit his lip when he came back. Betty, you could see she was slammed. Yet they quickly regrouped. They tried to keep a good attitude. So we drove them to a shelter. And I never forget Betty saying, we never got our hopes up. And Al saying, I'll hit the slave market tomorrow. That means looking for day hall labor. It was now May. We finally got our book contract. This meant we get a little bit of money so we could survive and pay down some of the bills. I had a coworker, Elizabeth Fernandez, who handled a lot of my affairs while I was on the road. I'd taken her down to the rail yard a year before. She wanted to take some pictures for a photo class. We were just friends. She was about to get married to somebody. I didn't have a girlfriend in that period. Maybe that's because I thought my idea of a good time was taking a woman to the rail yard. That may explain why there was no girlfriend in my life. And Alan Peacock was enthusiastic about the book. We moved up to Phoenix and saw more despair. We'd come to despise missions. Michael took these pictures, and as I look at them now, it's what we said back then. They're more like prisons than they are anything else. And we ended up in Yuma. We camped in a rubber tram jungle on the Colorado River. We hadn't had a bath in a long time, and man, that river felt good. Yeah, we had half the advance money, but it was already spent. We had a lot of overdue bills to pay. It wasn't in anger, but for sanity's sake, that we needed some space. Michael had to do some repair work on his marriage, so we drove home. I dropped Michael off. The plan was for him and his wife to vacation in Arizona. I'd pick Michael up in Phoenix, and we continue our work. There's one thing left to do that I'll explain in a bit. I drove on to Needles, California alone. There I found this family. The man lost his job in Texas. Just like in the Grapes of Wrath era, Needles was a gateway city to California. Then I found this mother hitchhiking. I went to Lake Powell. There was a 20th anniversary of Glen Canyon Dam's construction. I wanted to cover that story. Interior Secretary James Watt was there. He was in office under Ronald Reagan. He said we didn't have to care about the environment. The rapture was coming. Boy, did his handlers treat me with suspicion. I've been covering the homeless for so long, I felt homeless. So I ended up camping on the shore of the lake next to Dave Foreman. He was one of the founders of Earth First. Dave had a case of beer. So there was this Philadelphia Inquirer reporter and I. We sat in the bed of Dave's pickup truck, drinking beer until the sun came up over Lake Powell the next day. So the next day, the Earth First people floated his boat around James Watt's boat. He had not long before banned the Beach Boys from playing in the Washington Mall. I think he thought their music was satanic or sinful or something, I forget. Anyway, they antagonized him with some Beach Boys music. Meanwhile, Michael was in Tucson with his wife, Brenda. They did some tourist stuff. But like me, he was obsessed with the story, and he shot these other people, this man collecting cans to sell. Note the Mercedes. He followed this guy around for a little bit. And then these other people. Louis, he was ahead of his time. There was that one thing we had left to do. We'd put this ad in the Youngstown Vindicator. We still hoped to document someone leaving Youngstown. We'd met this jobless steelworker through the ad. These pictures are from back in March. He was working with one of his kids on a home science experiment. We'd kept in touch by phone, and he told us that he and a few buddies were going to hit the road in a few days. So we drove night and day back to Youngstown, all the way across the country. When we got there, we found out he'd left the day before we arrived. His wife had no idea where he was. So we turned around and drove night and day back across the country. We stopped in Denver to see Sam, the guy we'd ridden the freight train across Kansas with. Then we got home. I used the rest of the advance money to buy a home computer for a few $1,000s. Remember, this was 1983. There was no hard drive, just a floppy disk. It kept crashing. This is the message I kept getting. You can imagine the language I spoke back to this computer. Life magazine was still talking with us, but it turned out the story was dead. We were in a recovery. Everyone was doing better, the papers told us. And I wrote. I was in a black hole. It was like, I can't remember those weeks. I took no pictures. I didn't sleep. I was night and day working. The book was supposed to come out later that year, and my deadline was May. And I finished. Then I got real sick. I won't get into all the details, but one night I thought I was having a heart attack. My colleague, Hillary Abramson, she drove me to the hospital. Basically, my body was breaking down from lack of sleep for months. That's all I'll say about that. Michael had his own issues. Our colleague Erhard Kraus saw Michael unloading food from a truck and wondered what was going on. And turns out Michael was volunteering at a food bank. He was giving some food away to some poor people. I didn't know about this until many years later. But that fall we had our victory lap. We went to New York City to deliver the photos. The book was delayed until early 85. January 85 was going to be the release now. We got tickets to Saturday Night Live, but we never went. There was a crazy party at the Peppermint Lounge in the West Village. One of our editors, Jim Fitzgerald, had a Rolling Stones book coming out. There were naked people, cocaine everywhere. It was 1983 Manhattan. We stuck with beer. I think Michael and I drank over a dozen beers each that night, though, so we weren't exactly not toasted. But mostly we played tourists. You know those buildings, seen through the crown of the Statue of Liberty. George Willig had climbed the outside of one of the towers. He signed his name here before he was arrested. 18 years later, Michael spent 27 hours amid the ruins the day after they fell. I watched the second tower go down from my rooftop where I lived uptown. So this became our fourth book together, The Aftermath. Anyway, going back in time, back to 1983, Alan gave me the edit back at the end of the year. Here are just a few pages of the copy edit that came later. We had a year before the book would come out. That's how it is doing a book. It's a very slow process. We would learn that 1984 would be a very interesting year.